So then, okay, so you have that clearance, but I'm guessing every time you show up to the White House, you still have to go through a security check or something, right?
You have to go through a big song and dance at the Northwest Gate. Back then, they would once a week let you drive your car right up to the door. You can't do that
Really?
anymore. I'll tell this story. You had to haul all your gear up to the guard post at the Northwest Gate, and they would go through everything. And you had to put, if you're the photographer, you put your camera on the table and turned it on to show them it was a real camera. Because apparently the Secret Service guys, they would tell you the story that people would made a perfect camera with a gun in it. So
wow.
And then the audio guy would have a big sack of cables and batteries, and one day the sound guy I was working with had a bag of weed with him, and he figured I could put my bag of weed in my run bag. Big deal. So they get to he didn't know he's gonna have to. So he drops this thing on the guy's going through it. He pulls it out, cables, batteries, bag of weed, microphone, and then they look at him and they go, "Okay, put it all back."
Did they let him in?
Oh yeah.
They didn't care?
They didn't care. They said, "We do bombs."
That's amazing. Do you think that would happen nowadays? I can't imagine that happens nowadays. I doubt it.
No, they said we do bombs and guns. And the dogs
they didn't care.
And the dogs either do bombs or drugs, not both.
So, that's amazing. Okay, that's a surprise. I would not have expected that's, and I'm guessing that's not because Reagan was particularly friendly towards cannabis, though, right? Was that just because they just didn't care back then?
Yeah, no, they didn't particularly care, and I mean, it was their option. They could have made a complete horror show out of it, and the message was clear. Please don't have your weed in your run bag. They weren't happy to see it. They didn't think it was particularly funny. We did when it was all over. At the time, I thought I was in serious trouble.
It's funny because it reminds me of all the stories that I've heard from. At my last station, we had some people who had been there 40 years, and they talked about how it was completely acceptable back in the day to drink in the newsroom. Even like I've heard stories of cocaine.
Oh,
definitely
that's my next story. That's my next story.
Oh, okay. Please do.
Coke in the 80s was ridiculously prevalent, and I don't think it's any big secret that TV news and live TV. There was a lot of people buying Coke, and the Coke dealers in the 80s, which I've been reading about lately just because I was there. I was like, well, there's books about this now. They were very sophisticated. And I knew a guy, let's just say I knew a guy, who owed a dealer so much that they were actually able to get a collection agency to garnish his wages.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, that's a famous story in DC. And one day at the White House, they used to have what's called a lunch lid. They would announce a lid on that you can go to lunch, nothing's going to happen. And it was called a lunch lid. So one afternoon, the receptionist comes on the PA system and says, lunch lid starts in 20 minutes. And by the way, whoever lost a small brown glass vial of white powder can pick it up at the press secretary's front desk.
What?
Because they were like, again, they're just saying the message. They're like, you might not want to bring your goodies to work with you with the White House.
This is definitely not what I expected to hear about working in Reagan's White House press corps. Okay.
You remember the Contras?
Okay, so you go in with or without your drugs, depending on who you are.
Depending on who you are, exactly.
Okay, and then what do? You set up in the same room that we watch people in right now?
Absolutely. It is the same room, which is fascinating to me. It's got a door.
Is it small? How big is that room?
It's tiny. It's over an old swimming pool. There was a swimming pool that they built that room over for Carter. That room is from the Carter administration, and it's tiny. It's got a door that opens out onto the Rose Garden where you can get those helicopter arrivals and departures, and then back of that room is at the time, probably I assume still was where all the correspondence desks were, and the whole thing was jammed. Everybody smoked, And there were it was Sam Donaldson was a big anti-smoking guy, and he had him put in. They eventually banned smoking, but they had him put in all air purifiers up in the back room, and it was a big thing. If you came into that briefing room in 1983 during a downtime, you'd see a bunch of people lying on those seats, smoking, reading books, waiting for the next thing to happen. And you would, in the morning, you'd get there and you'd cover the morning briefing. I can tell you a good morning briefing story.
Please.
You would you get there, and the press secretary at that time was a guy with a wonderful name, Larry Speaks, and Larry Speaks was the spokesman, and he was a funny guy. That's what a lot of the Reagan people, they were actually funny. I liked them, and so Larry comes out one morning for the 8:30 a.m. briefing. All the photographers would line up along one aisle by the door so everyone can get their shot, and he comes out, and it might be the first time I ever covered one of these, and I really didn't know the protocol, and it was during when the administration was pressing the Senate to pass a Contra aid bill for the Contras in Nicaragua, and Reagan loved the Contras, and so Larry comes out with a briefcase looking like really top secret CIA, and he puts the briefcase on the podium, and he goes, "All right, all you guys, put your cameras down. I don't want to see this on any gag reels." And I thought, oh, maybe he's kidding. So I just sort of had my camera, I kept rolling, and he opens up the briefcase and takes out this toy shotgun and assembles the shotgun, and then pulls a rubber band across it and starts shooting all the reporters with the rubber bands. And then he goes, $13 million will buy you a lot of these. So, and then he looked over at me and he goes, "Did you just film that?" I said, "I wasn't supposed to." And he goes, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm sending someone to talk to you later."
So it's interesting that and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. I showed this a second ago, but Reagan's administration imported coke via the CIA. Was this something that you guys were actually talking about, that the administration, I mean, since we were talking about drugs and the press corps and everything, was this something that people were talking about at the time? I mean, I know looking back,
not in my circles.
2020.
Yeah, not in my circles.
Not in your circles.
Not in my circles. People were wondering where they could get some drugs, but and really, I was sort of debating whether I don't want to turn this thing into a Animal House fraternity drug story cowboy thing. There was that aspect of it. It was fun. We were all in our 20s, and we were having fun. But no, the Reagan administration was very pro-Contra, and they had they loved. There was a guy named Commander Zero, Eden Pastora. Do you remember Eden Pastora? And Eden Pastora was beloved by the administration, and the first assignment I ever went on was to go cover an Eden Pastora press conference, which there's a little story that goes with that. But so the Contra aid was huge with these guys. And so the fact that there was an aid bill they were trying to push through, for some reason, $13 million. It doesn't sound like much now, but it probably was then. And so Larry thought it would be funny to show the kind of weapons that the Reagan administration wanted to give to the Contras.
So I pulled this up. This is from the I believe this is the Justice Department. I could be wrong. No, I believe it doesn't say DOJ, but this is the CIA Contra crack cocaine controversy, a review of the Justice Department's investigations and prosecutions. And it opens up the San Jose Mercury News published first installment of 3-part series in '96 of articles concerning crack cocaine, the CIA, and the Nicaraguan Contra Army. For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood Street gang of Los Angeles.
Freeway Ricky Ross.
Say that again.
Freeway Ricky Ross. That was Freeway Ricky Ross. That was his name.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're familiar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a famous story.
Okay. So this is interesting.
That's what he says. That's what the drug dealer tells you. He was backed by the government, and the government says, yeah, sure.
And we think corruption in our time sometimes is some people are like, oh God, it's so bad. That's like, it's easy to think about now like the news business being so terrible, but you know, and biased and all that stuff. But you know, some of the stuff I read historically shows that the journalism has always had its has always had its issues, and government is no different. Okay, tell me about Reagan. Before I want to get through the rest of your day because I'm fascinated by, you know, you show your drugs to the Secret Service and then all this stuff. But
then Larry
I'm
comes
curious.
out with a shotgun with the rubber bands. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. And because I want to ask you, let's go through your day. But my next question, my follow-up question to be thinking about is, you know, Reagan was really, unless I'm missing something here, Reagan seems like the first sort of like Hollywood actor, maybe a Trump 1.0, a guy who came on the scene. I don't know, maybe some people, some Reaganites would hate the comparison. Maybe some Trumpists would hate the comparison. But, you know, he seems like he was like this. He was a guy who came out of a non-political background necessarily in the sense that, I mean, he obviously had experience, but he was you know, he was an actor and kind of a celebrity in that regard. So that's the next thing I want to ask you
about. I do. I think you can draw a line. I think it did. I think what we just finished up in 2020, you can definitely draw a line back to 1980. To me, and I'm not, you know, as simply as a working guy back in those days, it seemed to me that what happened was the change in the left was that the left gave up its traditional voter base of blue collar union stuff for identity politics, and the right realized we don't have to court any of our typical supporters if we can mobilize every single conservative Christian vote. And that's what the left and the right concluded in the early 80s. And I think everything that's come from that since, you know, you can draw a line back to Reagan. I don't think Reagan would recognize 2020 as anything that he would have, you know, thought, yeah, this is where we want to go. But I think that is where it went.
So let's go back to your day, because then I want to get into what it was like compared to now, the questions that people are asking in these press briefings and how Reagan was treated by the White House press corps versus maybe other presidents. So, all right, so we've gotten to the point where now you're in this small room that's over an old swimming pool. People still have their cannabis or cocaine on them. Are they doing it in the actual press briefing room?
No.
Did they try to hide it? Like, is it just one big orgy? What's happening there?
It was cigarettes. Everyone smoked back then.
Okay.
But no, I mean, I have told you my 2 stories involving drugs.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what happened? So the press secretary comes in, or did you ever have Reagan come in himself?
Oh yeah, Reagan. If there was a big event, or you know, Ed Meese, you know, any cabinet member was welcome to take the podium at any time that was, you know, appropriate. Also, if there was you know, I remember the head of the IRC was a regular speaker. There was a famous case of a hijacking of a TWA jet that wound up in Libya, where they shot an American diver, a guy named Robert Steedham. And when they killed Steedham, the Justice Department and the FBI, they were, you know, they occupied the White House press briefing room. And so, you know, if there was a big story, you know, the White House angle came out of that room, sometimes from Reagan, sometimes from the spokesman, sometimes from some cabinet person. But you could spend days with nothing happening.
What was his style like as a person being interviewed? And can you draw any comparisons with him and any other presidents? Did he have a particular style that he
I mean, he was just really folksy, really grandfatherly. You know, he drove everyone around him nuts because he ad-libbed. He was a great ad-libber. And so sticking to the script was not necessarily his strong point, but you know, he was just an engaging, charismatic guy, and the people around him were quite engaging. I remember Bob Dole, Jack Warner. Who was the one that was married to Elizabeth Taylor? I can't think of his name now. That was John Warner. John Warner and Jack Kemp. You know, those were all the Republican lights of the day, and they definitely had the power.
Did he ever use the term fake news? at you guys?
That's a good question.
Or did
I feel
did
like
it
it's been
feel like he
around
was
longer
covered,
than
you know,
well,
'cause yeah, go ahead.
what we were very aware of and what we did cover as a story was the fact that the Reagan administration was the first one to ever wake up to the idea of a press bypass, that they really didn't need to go through their own press corps to get the word out to the world. I mean, there was no social media yet, there was no Twitter, none of that, but there was still plenty of ways for them to speak directly to their constituency uh, in about issues that normally they would have fed to us to do a story about, where they could go straight to gun lobby and farming things, big Republican issues that they didn't maybe not care for how they were being covered by the left wing media. Um, so
So
they would.
wait, was that a thing back then? Was the
Oh yeah.
idea that you had kind of the mainline liberal uh press corps way of looking at things? That was a thing back then?
Oh yeah. Oh sure, sure. Oh, the idea that that the press was a left wing conspiracy, that's been around forever.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's not news. That goes. Oh, I remembered from the as a child in the '60s. I remember, people saying that the people in the press said people saying the press is left wing, and then the radicals saying they're not left wing. They're not. We're radical. So no, that's been a thing forever.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting because people like Matt Taibbi, independent journalist, now used to be with Rolling Stone, talks about how one of his theories on how the press has kind of become sort of this establishment elite class of ideologues in a lot of ways is partially because it used to be his take was that it used to be kind of like a blue collar job, and now it's everybody's going to Princeton or Mizzou
yeah,
or wherever you go, and they're all but it makes
that
sense
sounds
sound like it was
reasonable.
very similar still back when you were in the press corps, or maybe he's talking about 100 years ago and you're already there.
Yeah, I mean that seems plausible. Definitely the ranks of the national media, as I knew it in the '80s, covered everything from Ivy League, J school doctorates to technicians, blue collar. The local the networks in DC, which also ran the local affiliates in DC. They hired all DC guys, and it was very much a Howard University African American crowd. Uh, actually running cameras and switching trucks and the live trucks, and the places like Satellite News Channel and CNN, which were new then, they were hiring kids right out of college. Here's a camera, here's an editing room.
Okay, so that's similar. I mean,
Yeah.
the just like the young crowd. However, in my time, even in a few years, I saw a lot of retirement buyouts, and I saw it shift dramatically to a younger group, especially for producers.
Hmm.
We got a lot of anchors that just decided, it's not going the right direction, and we lost a lot of
Yeah.
institutional
Yeah.
knowledge a few
Well,
years
that's when I
ago.
left. That's when I left, frankly. I got out in 94, 95. And I was definitely, it was a hard copy and those kind of shows where had just come on the air. And it became clear to me and to a lot of my peers that, people woke up one day and said, hey, you can have a set with a news desk and an anchor and, and make it look like the news and have it be totally made up. And, I read a great quote recently where someone said, "Yeah, it's the networks hated us and then they became us."
Hmm.
Reality TV was being invented, and it started with shows like Hard Copy and Inside Edition, and that's your fake news, really, and it's swamped, the quote unquote real news.
Okay, before we get to that part, because that's fascinating. Um, did did the press corps ask questions like you hear them nowadays? Because I I think, at least again in my short experience, it feels like social media changed the way that reporting is done. At least like when I see the White House press corps questions nowadays. It seems like they're made for Twitter. They may not be what the public is interested in hearing about. They may not be helpful questions whatsoever for understanding any particular number of topics, but they are great for a quick, sensational soundbite on social media. How do you feel like questions were posed back then? I mean, did you get like a reporter that would stand up like a Jim Acosta and like, blah, 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 blah,
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
amazing. Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bill Plant, Sam Donaldson, these guys, Sam Donaldson was known to be able to yell louder than the helicopter that was, landing. Because Reagan was also very press averse. He wanted to manage that stuff very carefully. And
Okay.
events, there were all these events where there were supposed to be no question events, photo ops in the cabinet room or even in the Oval Office or out on the lawn when he's coming and going to the helicopter. And those guys were like, screw you, we're the press. We'll ask questions whenever we want. And it was their job to get right up in it. You were considered not doing your job if you didn't do that.
So, okay. Talk to me about what you just brought up, which was how the rise of did you say that was the fake news? Those shows, like, which was the first one you named?
Inside Edition.
Inside Edition. Okay, yeah.
And there was also Hard Copy was another one.
Let's go back to what we had at the time, like what national news was available at the time, and then what you saw added to it, and then how that changed what we now see as like NBC, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, like how all that came about.
Well, they've had to take on the trappings of that more sensationalistic tabloid style of presentation that when Hard Copy and Inside Edition started coming out, they came on the air. That we had our local. Now I'm talking about when I was in local news. We had our local block where we started having shows at 4, like you described, and then ours would end at 6, I guess, or 6:30. Then we'd have the national news with Dan Rather in our case, and then after Dan Rather comes Hard Copy or Inside Edition, which is just riding on the coattails of this serious old school news presentation, and they're just they're freewheeling sensationalist video tabloids. It's like the New York Times or followed by the National Enquirer, and none of us liked it. And I had other things I wanted to do anyway. I'm not saying I left the business because it changed, but I could also see that it was going to change. And my friends from local news, of which I still have many, who did their whole careers at WFSB in Hartford, they say, it's a different business now. But you'd probably do better to talk with them.
Before we go any further, if you want to age as well as Tom Myron, you should go to AllisonWinePromo.com. AllisonWinePromo.com. High altitude Argentinian Malbecs. Some of my favorite wines, and you support the channel in the meantime. So if you're a wine drinker, AllisonWinePromo.com, check them out. It's Bonner wine. Tom, are you a wine or a beer drinker?
Neither, but my wife is a wine drinker.
Okay,
I'm a non-drinker.
You did. I don't know. After all the Coke and cannabis stories,
I had mine.
I don't have a promo for any of those. So
yeah, well, it's probably coming.
Yes. Okay.
Pot's legal here now.
Actually, you know what? I would have no problem. If there's a cannabis company out there that would like to promote themselves on Allison Morrow's channel. Well, I'll have you right after the wine. And we'll call it the Reagan White House press deal. Okay.